I'm Jenny from social enterprise Climate Friendly Food, and I want to tell you about an initiative called Fruit Trees for Climate Emergency. So why are fruit trees so important? Well, we know that in the UK economy, if we take into account consumption, so things like imports, we know that the food system makes up about 30% of our carbon equivalent footprint. And this is marginal land that we see here, and we can see that this actually has the maximum calorific output. And when I say marginal land, is that we had to put drainage in to grow these trees. Normally this land would be considered suitable for grazing only. We're quite careful to sort of avoid getting into the arguments around, whether soil carbon reaches equilibrium or whether cows belching are as bad as rice paddies. These are actually, unfortunately, things that just get us locked into actually doing nothing. What we do know is that when we grow perennials, like fruit trees, we have the maximum calorific output per acre, and also we can have these food systems with very little fossil fuel input. For example, I pick an apple and I can eat it straight away. Where's the fossil fuel there? Well, this can be delivered to a local customer, and then obviously the fossil fuel will just be the transport. It's avoiding all the things involved in centralised distribution, like long scale transport, refrigeration and those kind of things. There's a very, very short route from field to plate. So let's discuss some of the problems with fruit trees. So if we look at this fruit tree here, we can see a really bad example of how not to look after fruit trees. As you can see, it's become overwhelmed, weedy, and it's not been pruned. A lot of tree initiatives unfortunately just involve raising the money for the planting, but that's not the story of fruit trees. They need time and looking after, and also there's a delay time between the initial planting and by the time you have crops, and this is really what this initiative, Climate Emergency for Fruit Trees, is about. So here we have an example of a well planted fruit tree. This time it's a plum, and you can see that it's staked at the bottom. It has a plastic mat underneath. The plastic mat is really important because essentially that is what's stopping the grass from encroaching into the weeds of the fruit tree. So grass is always the enemy of the fruit tree. Also, this plastic is lifted every year. Everything's given a healthy dose of wood chip compost and also seaweed when we have it, and then the plastic is laid back down. When this plant was originally planted, it also was given a dose of mycorrhizal fungi, so that's to encourage the fungal mat underneath the whole of the orchard. So this apple tree was planted in 2013, and we can see that this is a really good example of why it's important to have a goblet shape in pruning. So this has to be annually pruned, and we can see that the main branches are coming out from a centre point, and that's because they're absolutely laden with fruit. So the weight of that fruit essentially is pulling the bough of the tree down. And so without that goblet shape and without that annual pruning initially to set up this tree, it would not be possible to produce that much fruit. So we have to recognise with fruit trees that there's an ongoing initial maintenance cost as well. Here we can see some of our hand-picked hazelnuts that are just drying, ready to be sold in the next couple of weeks. So here you can see a panoramic of quite an embryonic commercial forest garden. A forest garden is different from an orchard in the sense that it's a multi-layered. You see there's quite a lot of grass at the moment. An important part of that is the shelter belt or the windbreak, because fruit trees don't do well if they're getting battered by the wind. And here we have Elaeagnus umbellata, absolutely delicious actually, really nice, also known as glitter berries. Let's have a quick look at those. Hopefully see the little glittery sheens on them. There we go. And this is a nitrogen fixer. So as I mentioned before, the mycorrhizal mat, will come out from this tree and then actually feed the trees within the forest gardening time. All these things take time, but it's an important part of this idea that the fertility comes from sight as opposed to bringing it in from elsewhere, and that's how we get sustainability and again reduction of fossil fuel use. Let's have another look at aspect of a nitrogen fixation. So this tree is an Italian alder, again nitrogen fixing, and that sits to the north of a guild of apple trees. If I just sort of spin around, unfortunately you can't really see the apples on the apple trees because they've all been picked at this moment. This one's closest is a Katie. So this is an important part of the story again of this self-sufficiency in terms of fertility. And under here we can start again very early days, an embryonic understory of herbs. So we have mint here and we have thyme. We have also other plants that again for helping with fertility, which is this one, which is comfrey, which can be used as part of the fertility again for putting under trees. So what is the 2K funding for? So firstly, I would like to write new writing materials, write instruction manuals, technical writing for farmers and growers on how to raise fruit trees. So you can see here, was written in 2005, and we can see sort of like a chapter for every kind of field scale vegetable that you can grow. So we now would like to move that information onto forest gardening, commercial forest gardening, and in particular fruit trees. Secondly, we'd like to create a monthly lotto, and that would just be in the UK to start with. We'll see how it goes, and that means that we'd have to have a gambling licence, but that would ensure that people could regularly contribute, and that money again would go towards advice, support for farmers, and also would pay for trees, but also pay, and this is really important, the maintenance grant that's needed for that first 5 years before they start cropping. I think this is the part which has been falling down in the past. If you contribute towards this crowdfunder, what we do have is we have a Noah's Ark here. A Noah's Ark of every 2 named varieties that grow successfully in the northwest. We're near Merseyside, near Liverpool. And what we can do is send you some cuttings this winter for you to plant, providing that they haven't got breeders' rights on, of which a lot of our varieties haven't got breeders' rights on. So you can get down with the blackcurrants here. We've got other weird and wonderfuls as well, so we can create a list. Things like Japanese wineberry, Saskatoon. We know the problems that we face with climate change. We know a big part of the problem with the food system is the amount of fossil fuels that we use in that food system. And this really, we're walking here through the future. This is what we want to see on all particularly grade 3 agricultural land, which is suitable for some level of cropping. You know, that here we can get these magnificent fruit trees. This is the future.